Good afternoon, class. Welcome to this session of International Business Environment. In our last class, we started discussing some of the non-tariff barriers which are commonly used by countries in controlling the imports and helping the domestic industries. And we discussed regarding quotas, voluntary export restraints, local content requirement, buy local, and licenses. Now, there are some of the other non-tariff barriers also which are used by the countries, and by using such measures, they try to restrict the imports in a indirect way. Now, the first among that is labeling and testing standards. Now, you might have seen that uh, uh, in the label of any packet that the product would be given a ag mark or FSSAI mark. Now, those are some kind of the standards used in Indian continent. Now, each country has its own testing standards and the way how it is to be labeled. Now, if at all the products does not stand by these testing standards and labeling standards, then there are chances that there would be restriction on the import of such goods by some of the countries. Now, these countries require that goods entering into their boundaries should meet certain requirements in terms of packaging, labeling, and also testing standards. Now, under such circumstances, the economics will allow only sale of those goods which satisfy these standards. Now, these standards require that the companies indicate, especially on its product, the name of the country where it is made or where the package of the goods is done, and this must indicate the raw materials used in its production also. Now, all these requirements add on to the production cost of the company, and that is an unavoidable cost. Now, testing standards usually require the testing of products which come from foreign countries, and these are to be tested in the domestic laboratory so as to ensure health, so as to ensure the quality of this test. Now, labeling, or for that matter, even testing standards are insisted upon for to ensure that quality of goods seeking an access into the domestic market. But many countries use them as protection measures. Now, such measures are complex and discriminatory barriers to international trade. At the same time, they are one of the most difficult ones to control as compared to other barriers to trade. Now, the next one is a sanitary and phytosanitary tariffs. Phytosanitary barriers. Now, phytosanitary especially means to plant, especially in international trade. Now, these measures may be sanitary or phytosanitary measures. They are usually taken to protect against the risk linked in, maybe food safety, animal health, or in terms of plant protection, or it is also used to prevent, and sometimes it also helps to limit the damages within the territory of the country from either the entry of the product or establishment of spread of pests from the foreign countries. Phytosanitary measures are also called as SPS measures, or the sanitary and phytosanitary measures are also called as SPS measures. Now, there is a agreement under WTO, which is called as SPS agreement, and it seeks to lay down the minimum sanitary and also phytosanitary standards that the member countries must, abide by for international trade of food products. Now, this will ensure the safety of life and also health of human, animals, and plants. Now, however, countries actually lay down more stringent PSP norms. Now, this at times is done to decrease the import coming into the country. Now, developing countries have for long maintained that such standards can be and are being used as trade barriers against them. Now, this practice has an adverse impact on their exports. Now, the most common complaint is that standards which are being set would be definitely high to maintain and often are unreasonable, and therefore it is in fact contended that the standards are, strictly kept at high levels so that exports from the developing countries can be banned. Now, one best example that we can give is that Indian meat and poultry for products does face such standards imposed by either European Union or United States also. The next one is specific permission requirement. Now, under this measures, it requires that the potential importers or exporters, they secure permission from government authorities, and this will involve the issuing of import or export license, which may be costly on one hand, and also it would be time consuming. Now, one other measure is counter trade. Now, what happens under counter trade is that there is no exchange of money or any other monetary value. Here, there would be exchange of goods with goods. Now, under counter trade, the exchange of goods with goods between countries is being done. Now, this particular kind of practice would be common in case of maybe aerospace and defense industry, whereby the importer country may not have enough foreign currency to pay for the imports. Now, the next one is administrative barriers for trade. Now, administrative barriers to trade are a different and special category of non-tariff barriers, and their main source would definitely be, as the name suggests, the administrative regulations and procedures, which would have a strict effect on international trade. Now, these trade barriers can take form of legal barriers or procedural barriers. Now, speaking about this legal barriers or procedural barriers. Now, barriers usually would be caused by different laws and administrative regulations in domestic countries. And the procedural barriers, they are related to trade procedures, and it might include activities, practices, and formalities involved in international movement of goods. Now, delays may be made with respect of issue of license, custom valuation, and clearance of consignment of goods, and so on. Now, these types of barriers are most difficult to monitor and eliminate as compared to other tariff or non-tariff barriers. Now, these were some of the different kinds of tariffs. First, we studied regarding tariffs, where we discussed regarding specific tariff, ad valorem tariff, and combined tariff, and we also discussed regarding some of the non-tariff barrier. Now, moving forward, the next topic that will have to be discussed is anti-dumping. Now, we have already discussed what dumping is. Now, to once again recall dumping, it can be defined as selling of goods in foreign market, and when selling is done, the price would be such that it would be below the fair market value, or selling goods in the foreign market at something below their cost of production. Or in other words, anti-dumping can also be called as, no, it is a way in which the companies usually unload their excess production in the foreign markets. Now, regarding anti-dumping, we had already discussed when we were speaking regarding protection. Now, this anti-dumping can also be, predatory in nature, which produces using substantial profits from the home market to subsidize price in the foreign market, and in doing so their main view to drive domestic producers out of that market and later rising price and on a huge profit. Now, certain kinds of things would also be done. That is to tell, as of now, usually the anti-dumping is done to unload the excess of goods in the foreign market, and the point of view would be that something is better than nothing. But in some of the cases, there are also chances that they use it as a entry strategy, and when they enter, they usually sell their goods comparatively very low to that of the price of the goods in the domestic market, thereby wipe the domestic industries out of the sector. And later on, when they understand and when they know that they are the ones who holding the market, they would start raising the price and would be making huge profits. Now, if the export price is, lower than the normal value, it usually is called as dumping. And thus, there are two fundamental parameters used for, determination of dumping. It can be normal value, and the second one is export price. Now, under normal value, what happens is it is the price at which goods under complaint are sold in the other country in or in a normal course of trade. Now, the domestic market of the export countries price or that is what the name suggests. The value would be according to the value of the goods what is sold in the domestic country itself. But usually the export price, what happens is the export price of the goods, they are with a view of, or the rate at which the goods come into the country is called as export price. Then there is one more thing that we'll have to understand under dumping, that is dumping margin. Now, to tell about this dumping margin, margin is nothing but what we call as gap. Difference between the two is nothing but the margin. Under dumping margin, it is the difference between the normal value and the export price of the goods which are being exported. Now, usually it would be expressed in terms of percentage. Now, for that example, if India is into, the act of dumping, maybe 1 kg of apple here in India or the normal price would be 110, but the export price would be 100 rupees. In that case, the margin would be 10 rupees, and that margin is called as dumping margin. And speaking regarding this dumping market, it goes without telling that dumping definitely is an unfair trade practices, especially when it causes injury to the domestic industry of any country for that matter. And the anti-dumping policies are formulated to protect domestic producers from unfair foreign competition. Now, anti-dumping usually is a measure to rectify the situation arising out of the dumping of goods and its trade distortive. And therefore, the purpose of anti-dumping duty usually is to rectify whatever the bad things happens because of dumping in the market. Or to give a specific word, it is called as distortive effect. Mm, Nothing but the negative effects because of dumping. Now, the purpose of anti dumping, as we said, is to rectify the trade distortive effect of dumping and also re establishing the fair trade. Now, when anti dumping measures are taken, it usually provides relief to the domestic industry against all those injuries caused by dumping. Now, the one association which holds upright the concept of free trade is World Trade Organization. Now, as per the World Trade Organization rules, the member nations are also allowed to impose anti-dumping duties, if any, on the foreign goods which are being sold cheaper in foreign markets than the home market. Now, this anti-dumping duty does not, normally exceed the margin of dumping, which is difference between the sale price in the domestic country and the export price. Now, if we speak of India, even in India, there are laws which provides, that the anti-dumping duty to be levied should not exceed the dumping margin. Now, that is to tell, as we took the example of Apple and we said 100 rupees and 110 and the margin was 10 rupees. When a country puts in anti-dumping tax, it should not be more than that margin, or according to the example that we have taken, it should not be more than rupees 10. Now, these might be the rules, but then there are two different situations under which, any country, or for that matter any exporter, is excluded from the scope of the anti-dumping investigation or the anti-dumping duties. When those two situations are in case of individual exporter, there is any exporters whose margin of dumping is less than 2% of the export price shall be excluded from the purview of anti-dumping duties, even if the existence of dumping is established. And when it comes to a country, investigation against any country is required to be terminated or cancelled if at all the volume of the dumped goods or the dumped imports or actual or potential from a particular country accounts for less than 3% of total imports of the like products. But again, in such cases, we should see that the cumulative imports of the like products from all these countries who individually account for less than 3% should not exceed 7% of the import of the like product. Now, whatever we discussed under the anti-dumping, now all the anti-dumping investigations and recommendations in India is carried by designated authorities. For in India it is Ministry of Commerce, whereas the imposition and collection of the duties is done by Ministry of Finance. Now the next one that we have under this chapter is counter trade. Now, what do we mean by counter trade? Now, we did discuss along the chapter, we discussed what do we mean by counter trade. Now, counter trade is nothing but a reciprocal form of international trade in which goods and services would be exchanged for other goods and services. There would be no any kind of payment and repayment in terms of finance or, for that matter, financial instruments. Now, this type of international trade is more common in developing countries, which has, a limitation or limited foreign exchange or the credit facilities. Now, this counter trade is divided basically into three kinds. That is barter, counter purchase, and offset. Now, these three are the types of counter trade. Now, speaking regarding counter trade usually provides, a kind of mechanism or a system for different countries which has, limited access to liquid funds to buy goods or to exchange goods and services from other countries. Now, this counter trade is a part of an overall import and export strategy that ensures a country with limited domestic resources and has access to needed items and raw materials. Now, additionally, it provides the exporting nation with an opportunity to offer goods and services in large international market and also promotes growth within the industry. Now, speaking regarding the three different kinds of counter trade. The first one is barter trade, which we all know, which we all have studied, and it is the oldest counter trade agreement if we have to be sure. Now, it is the direct exchange of goods and services with in an equivalent value, but there would be no any kind of exchange of cash or financial instruments. Now, this act of exchanging goods with another goods which is of equal value is called as trade. Now, for example, there might be two friends. Now, there might be a exchange of blue color pen for a black ink pen. Even that can be regarded as barter system. Now the next one is counter purchase. Now under counter purchase, what happens is the exporter usually sells goods or services, and definitely he sells it for importer, and he agrees to purchase other goods from the importer within a specified period. Now, unlike bartering, the exporters entering into a counter purchase arrangement must choose a trading firm to sell the goods they purchase and will not use the goods themselves. Now that is the difference between barter and counter purchase. The next one is offset agreement. Now under offset agreement, what happens is the seller usually he assists in marketing the products which are manufactured by buying country or allows part of exported products assembly to be carried out by the manufacturers in the buying country. Now, this practice we can see in terms of maybe, the aerospace or the defense industry and certain infrastructure industry also. Now, when we speak of infrastructure industry, definitely it has to be offset types of counter trade, because you cannot construct a dam and later on you cannot just, take it to some other place. Now, usually the offsetting is also more common for large and more expensive items. Now, an offset agreement, it may also be referred to as industrial participation or industrial cooperation. Now, speaking about this counter trade, there are quite a few examples of uh, the counter trade. Now, speaking regarding counter purchase. Now, what do we mean by counter purchase? A counter purchase means the sale of goods and services to a company in a foreign country by a company in the domestic country which would promise to make future purchase of specific product from the same country in that particular same company in that country. Now that is counter purchase, and we have already discussed. Now a buyback is also type of counter trade. Under buyback counter trade, what happens is it occurs when a firm builds a manufacturing facility in a country, or for that matter, it can also supply technology or equipments or training of the HR or the other services to the country, and it agrees to take a certain purchase percentage of plant's output as partial payment for the contract. Now, compensation trade is usually a form of barter in which one of the flows is partially in goods and partly would be in hard currency. Now, as we spoke about this counter trade, there are both benefits of it and also drawbacks for counter trade. Now, speaking regarding the benefits, a major benefit of counter trade is that it facilitates the conservation of foreign currency. That is to tell, you'll be making import also, but your foreign exchange resource will also be maintained. Now, that would be the main consideration for cash or the countries which has less foreign exchange, and thereby provides an alternative for traditional financing. Now, other benefits usually it includes, it decreases the unemployment and it increases the sales. There would be better utilization of the capacity, and it will also provide a easy entry into some of the challenging markets. Now, when we have benefits or there are some kind of advantages, this counter trade, it also has some kind of disadvantage. Now, disadvantages of this counter trade usually include there would be difficult negotiations and higher costs and logistical issues. Now, not only this, but the way in which the activities interact with the various trade policy, it also can be a point of concern for the open market operations. Now, the opportunities for the trade advancement, the shifting terms, and the conditions which are being instituted by developing nations also could lead to discrimination in the market. Hmm. Now, having said all this, uh, To wrap up this counter trade, the counter trade provides a mechanism for countries with limited access to liquid funds to exchange goods and services with other nations. And it goes without telling that the barter is the oldest counter trade agreement. The benefit of counter trade is that it facilitates the conservation of foreign currency, and the disadvantage is complex negotiation, higher costs, and also logistical issues. Now, having said all this, we come to the end of chapter 3. It again, you will have 5 more chapters. Now, speaking about the next chapter, it is all regarding the financial environment. The next one, the fifth chapter, is regarding economic institutions. The sixth one is regarding MNC, and the one chapter is regarding the all different kinds of you know all different kinds of trade negotiations that are being taken up in the world. Now, we shall wrap up this particular chapter by seeing what are the things that we had discussed in chapter 3. Now, we began with different kind of economic reforms. We began with world trade, then we understood economic reforms. We understood what is liberalization, privatization, and also globalization. And globalization, we studied many things, like what do we mean by globalization and how does it affects a country, whether globalization is to be maintained by a country or whether protecting the domestic industry is more important than globalization. Then we spoke regarding yes, then we spoke regarding domestic versus international business and managing business in the globalized era. Then again we had discussed regarding globalization, then protectionism policy. Then we discussed types of protectionism policy, the reasons, the effects, and then we discuss tariffs and non-tariff barriers, why the countries goes in for tariffs, and what are the different kinds of tariff barriers and types of tariffs and non-tariff barriers. And in our today's session, we discussed regarding some other few types of non-tariff barriers and anti-dumping and counter trade. And thereby we come to the end of the chapter 3, and hopefully you have listened to the class, and if at all you have any kind of doubt, it is you who have to be asking. Until you ask, I would not know as to whether you have understood or do you need any kind of extra explanation, or should we change the way we are doing online class or anything? Until you respond, I would be unable to understand what goes through your mind. Having said all these things, I hope you have maintained the notes, because I had said earlier, since the percentage of people who are attending online class is getting lower and lower day by day, and you are not taking the classes seriously, some measures has to be taken from our side. So I would not be circulating any handout unless I would know that you are genuinely unable to attend the online classes. Thereby we shall wrap it up here. Thank you class for your patience listening. In our next session we shall discuss the fourth chapter. You can leave the meeting now.